Thank you, Andrea. I'll probably also record to the computer just because I'm overcautious, but it's, yeah, great. So we have more members coming in over time, but let us start with the announcements, technical announcements first, if that's fine. So again, a big welcome to everyone to this fourth session of our monthly meeting series, Nourishing Feminist Advocacy, Collective Learning Sessions. Today, we will be talking about traditional media communications, and we are very grateful that you are all here for this joint learning together. Andrea, could I have the new slide? Before we begin, please let us remind you that we have some accessibility and logistics notes. We have interpretation into Spanish and French and English. So please select the channel that you would like to listen and speak in the meeting, and do not stay in the off channel. If you want to listen and speak in English, please select English or Spanish or French, but please do not remain in the off channel. That makes it hard for our interpreters. Andrea and I will be your accessibility coordinators. You can write to us directly if you have any accessibility issues or safety concerns in the chat. The meeting is open only to the Women's Major Group members as participants, but as you know, like we do every month, we'll be recording the first hour of the session where our speakers will be sharing their expertise. And then in the discussion segment, we'll stop the recording so we can have a safe space to discuss to our heart's content. In this meeting series, as in all Women's Major Group meetings, it's of utmost importance that we cultivate a safe space both for our speakers and participants, centering the demands and voices of all our members. For this reason, discriminatory remarks, hate speech, the denial of self-proclaimed identities, anti-rights discourse, and other forms of discrimination against folks and groups speaking their truth in this meeting will not be tolerated. Anyone engaging in such hate speech will be warned once and then will be removed from the Zoom platform. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to our Europe and Central Asia co-organizing partner, who will share the agenda with us and who will moderate today's session. Thank you so much, Valentina. Let me give the floor to you.
Thank you, Sheknaz. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. As the pandemic moved many international meetings to online platforms, the nature of our advocacy changed, and opportunity for peer learning that occurred during physically held meetings drastically declined. For this reason, as Women's Major Group, we are continuing our monthly meeting series by undertaking collective learning sessions with our members. And the 5 months leading up to the HLPF 2022 and different feminist advocacy strategy. This month, we'll be discussing traditional media communications. And we are very happy to have an amazing panel of speakers today. And we would like to start with feminist journalist, Natasha Dokovska. Natasha Dokovska is a journalist for more than 30 years, covering social issues and human rights in North Macedonia. She has been an editor, an advocate for human rights, an NGO activist and publisher. She has published books relating to peace journalism, PR, environmental justice, and gender equality. She is founder of Journalists for Human Rights in North Macedonia and of the new portal Text MK. Since December 2017, she is appointed program director and Journalist for Human Rights. Organizations that work on freedom of expression, media literacy, support alternative media, environmental journalism, citizen access rights, democracy development, and poverty reduction. Natasha, I would like to ask you about your perspective as a journalist. what will be important for you as journalists when you received information from civil society organizations? How should civil society organizations approach journalists? What will be your suggestion? Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Valentina. Hello to everyone. I'm really very happy that I can share my experience and my thoughts regards the media and cooperation with civil society organization. As you presented me, I'm a journalist by profession, and almost 20 years I worked as a professional journalist in the main media in North Macedonia. I have been from the beginner to the editor, but the last few years I work more as a human rights activist and engaged as a program director in journalist for human rights. But I believe that the name itself is quite provocative on the topic. For example, how the journalists are seen from the other side of the line, from the side of the human rights activists in my case. But the answer, I can say that it's very simple. The line of objective information should be followed. Even that when we ask, or when a lot of people, they ask me, is whether and how much it is possible to be in the same time the journalist, but also the civil society activist. I will responsibly say that it is possible, especially because many people consider the traditional print and broadcast media are part of the civil society sector or third sector. I will give you an example from North Macedonia that almost all private media, especially social media, are registered as civil society organizations. Because register as civil society organization give us more liberty, more free space, and then we can talk, or we can publish, and we can edit everything that we think that it's necessary. Of course, that in this case we have some possibility to publish the fake news and to go out of the reality and objectivity. But this is the question of professionalism or in journalism or in media. But when we talk about the line or about the cooperation between, possible cooperation between the civil society organization and journalism or media, I can say that journalists are expected not only to contribute to the profitability of a media outlet, but also to act ethically as responsible and accurate source of information. This is the same like a watchdog civil society organization who work to hold government accountability. It is this civic attribute of media outlets that separated them from other business in the private sector and lead to their frequent inclusion in definition of the civic sector. From the other side, media outlets, however, also differ sustainability from civil society organization, which is really very important. I can say that a lot of media outlets, a lot of media, today private media, small media outlets exist from civil society organization because almost all civil society organizations, for their visibility, they need to publish or to edit their information on some of media that they have some cooperation. But now I will start with my presentation about the traditional media and their role on the media space and their cooperation with civil society organizations. First, I will try to answer what are the traditional media. Traditional media, also called legacy media, include all forms of mass communication available before the advent of digital media. They are mostly broadly referred to television, radio, and newspaper. but they can include books, magazines, banners, billboards, infographics, and other form of outdoor arts. By extension, traditional media will include ancient form of communication, predating the mass media such as prayer flags and many words. What it means? This means that the fields for civil society organization, they are looking for their credibility, that it's much better to cooperate and to publish their information on traditional media than in the social media. Sometimes a lot of friends and colleagues, they ask me why. I will say because as I say on the beginning, the traditional media, they are also called legacy media, which means that they are looking for their credibility. They are looking not to publish the fake news, and they are in the line with media digital literacy. But next slide, please. What is the role of the traditional media? They play several important roles, which include education, informing, entertainment, serving as a forum for public discussion and discourse, acting as watchdog for the government, business, and other institutions, and facilitating communication. What this is very important. I can say that our organization, our civil society organization, Journalists for Human Rights, in their strategic plan, they say that our organization is based on 3 key elements. This is education, information, and communication, which is part of the traditional media. And I believe that it's very important, not only the media outlet, but also civil society organization to have a part of this key element in their strategic base, because this is very important for our visibility, but also for our communication with our auditorium or with our targets group. Next slide, please. And now is the question: what is the relation between media and civil society organization? I will say that here we have a two-way street, or that this is the cooperation in the main line, but on the two streets, which means that media looks to civil society organization representatives as trusted source experts, commentators, interview and talk show participants, but the civil society organization look to media to help spread their core message, which is very important. And now the question is why we need to engage with the media. Engaging with the media serves a number of purposes for the civil society organization, including, first of all, understanding the different dimensions of issue related to your field of work. Public view of the media can help one broaden one understanding of the issue. Amplify a civil society organization's voice and activity by reaching all sections of society, particularly in terms of advocacy and social service. Inform and educate the public on and encourage conversation around issue a civil society is championing, for example. Inspire the public to really behind the civil society missions and raise a civil society national and international public profile and raise fundraising possibility. Then how to engage with the media? This is one of the very important question, because this is also the question of our sustainability. here I have noticed a few elements, but first I wanted to tell you how we work in the frame of our organization, even that we are journalists, and even that almost all the journalists, because Macedonia is a small country, we know each other and we can easily communicate and find them and ask them for help, or that to publish some issue that is important for us. But we decide and we have good example to set up the Club of Friends, which is set up by the journalists, which means that the journalists are our supporter in that way, that are part of our Club of Friends. But how we are doing? Through contact and networking with the media, issuing a press release as an effective means of communication, that this is the template how to do it, and we also organize a training on that way with the interested civil society organization. Then also it's very important call up and follow up the things that or the happening within the civil society organization. But it's very important to be prepared sometimes to
Natasha,
be rejected. Yes,
Natasha, I'm sorry, if you can conclude, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I want to say that it's very important to be prepared, that sometimes our idea will not be accepted by media, that they will be rejected, and it's very important to work on the synergy between civil society organization and media, which means that the media train has changed rapidly. New technology are dismantling and the old way of gathering and dismantling news and information, and this changing media landscape offers civil society organization and founder new opportunity and new challenges, and this is the social media that we as civil society organization must be prepared to work in the same time with traditional and with the social media, because both of them are very important for us.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Thank you for valuable points. It's very important to mention that you highlight two very important way street on communication and cooperation between media and civil society.
Yeah,
thank you very much that you highlight the importance of keeping contacts and network and to be prepared. Thank you very much. And now I would like to offer the floor to Mildred Niza. Mildred is a self-proclaimed voice for Pan-African emancipation and believer in the power of effective communication. Mildred, who is a 7-time award-winning journalist from Kenya, with over 20 years experience as a human interest, social development journalist, columnist, as well as media communication expert, now present as a Pan-African transformational leadership coach, media and communication specialist, inspirational speaker, women's emancipation convener and writer and a poet. She has headed communication teams on Pan-African platforms, including Amnesty International, East African Regional Office, and the African Women's Development and Communication Network, Feminist, managing media and communication across 47 African countries. Mildred, can you share with us some of your experience during your work and your organization? How can we bring global South voices to the global traditional media? You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with sisters, with colleagues in the struggle globally. I affirm the WMG space as a very critical space for advancing the work that we do for women and girls globally. I celebrate the achievements we have made in amplifying the voices of women and girls globally, and most importantly, in sustaining the push for gender equality and women's rights. We cannot relent, we have to keep pushing. Thank you for bringing out this very important conversation on feminist advocacy and how we actually amplify that in media. Now, to paraphrase the question that has been presented to me, allow me to just paraphrase it a little bit, because I tend to, or we tend to understand that actually the focus that we would have is not how we can bring the global South voices to the global traditional media. No, the focus that we should have is how we should amplify indeed the voices of the global South to the global South, so that we can transform that which we want to transform, and therefore the global media will find their way to the global South to amplify what they see in the global South. So we redefine this approach because it is problematic for us in the global South to aspire for the global North, when we have not sorted or we have not amplified our voices in the global South to achieve what we need to achieve for our feminist advocacy for gender equality and women's emancipation. Therefore, I stand in this platform as a Pan-African transformational leadership coach on communication, on women's emancipation and advocacy, to amplify from the local, from the grassroots, that which we want to amplify in terms of women's rights before the global North media itself comes looking for the content and coverage here. Our approach is not the other way around. I thank you for bringing out the fact that I have worked with Femnet and continue to work with Femnet. I was the head of communications for Femnet until 2019. Femnet, like you have heard, the African Women's Development and Communications Network, operates right now currently in 49 African countries, if I'm not wrong, just short of 5, because we have 54 in Africa. So Femnet and the work that Femnet does for amplifying the voices of African women and girls actually incorporates what all of us do in our countries in terms of the gaps, in the loopholes, the aspirations, the rights, and of course, justice for African women and girls. So heading communications in all these countries meant that we put it together in a box and see how we can sustain the push, connecting from the top of the policy making and formulating bodies and the local at the bottom, where I want to encourage my mother to understand that she has a right to stand. She has every right to be here. Now, Femnet operates in very many ways. Even though I left in 2019, I'm still a very strong Femnet member. I still work alongside Femnet. We do lots of consultancies together and we claim spaces together with Femnet. And my entry point into Femnet through and through is enhancing the media and communication capabilities of how we message the work that we do, how we amplify our voices. Just recently, to tie into the question that was asked to me, Africa hosted a landmark historical event while globally we were having our CSW 66. So for the first time in 66 years, Femnet, collecting with other partners, put together the first Africa CSW 66. So to answer that question as to whether that coverage was amplified in the global platform or in the global South, I will tell you, we succeeded quite a bit down here in the global South to amplify the fact that for the first time in 66 years, African women and girls are convening for their CSW concurrently with the CSW in New York. We all understand the main purpose of this, the challenges we face accessing New York, the problems, the challenges that the African women have had, just like the challenges that we have from other regions. We understand that. But the fact that we were breaking that rhetoric, but by having a concurrent Africa CSW 66, running with the hashtag Africa Disrupt CSW 66, was enough to affirm the fact that the spaces of how we do our feminist advocacy, because of the target that we are targeting for our messaging, can be enhanced by how we strategize and plan. And yes, Africa Disrupt CSW 66 was picked up very well by the global media. And so we appreciate that. You will know that here in the continent, we've had several media advocacy strategies under Femnet that I can speak well of. Hashtag Follow the Protocol on the Maputo Protocol that has been taken up very well globally when we push for the implementation of the Maputo Protocol. We've had quite a bit of media strategies that have been adopted and continue to be adopted. I wanted to bring out the point that when we are talking about the Global South and feminist advocacy, we have to primarily think about not only for the Global South, but I believe that globally, when we are getting into communications, media, and advocacy, we have to look at the soul of advocacy and communications in our work. Now, we barely sit down to think about the soul, but the soul of the work that we do lies in the women and girls whose rights, justices, spaces, and aspirations we push for. So the soul of our advocacy is the women, and it is the girls. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves, when we are thinking about our soul, and when we are putting together an advocacy and media and communication strategy. And by the way, media and communication strategy are joined at the hips. They go together. They have to go together, because you can't have a wonderful advocacy strategy and hide it under the table. You need a media and communication strategy to put that light on the table, to let it shine. So when we are implementing our feminist advocacy strategies, we have to aspire to transform, first and foremost, the knowledge and understanding of the perceptions of our targets. And our primary target here is, when I speak from my continent, is Africa's women and girls first. Before I rush to galvanize their visibility on the global platform, I have to speak to them to transform their knowledge, to transform their perception, to transform their aspirations, so that we work together. One of the things we emphasize to our partners and our colleagues is that we cannot claim to have the onus to speak for them, because it is taking away their agency. So when we get to making them understand the soul, we want them to speak for themselves. We want them to articulate for themselves. We want them to be able to amplify themselves. So therefore, I ask you, my sisters, my colleagues, does your advocacy campaign have a buy-in with the primary target? That is the women and girls in your region, in your countries, in your areas, before we even talk about amplifying our voices at the global platform. Therefore, our passion, my passion going forward with Femnet and the other organizations is in redefining transformative advocacy approaches for Africa's women and girls. What transforms? How do we work to transform? Then I come to the point which has been captured very well by my colleague, my sister Natasha, has talked very well about what we say is strengthening media sensitivity and media sensibility on feminist advocacy. We must aspire to strengthen media sensitivity and media sensibility on feminist advocacy. This is where we get into how we engage to get the media to speak our language. How do we get the media to speak our feminist language? Does the media even care about our feminist language? Does the media even care about our feminism? Is feminism news to the media, or is it a so what approach? You who are in media know that so what is a very common question in the newsroom. So how do we get the media to speak our language? How do we strengthen media sensitivity and media sensibility? Media sensitivity comes out from quite a bit of what Natasha outlined. Do we know media? Do we understand media? Do we get it? Do we know how to present ourselves with media? Do we have a relationship with media so that we are just not engaging them on a one-off? We are not only calling the media when we have a big report to launch and tell them, oh, Femnet has produced this report on ending female genital mutilation. No, 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 no. A relationship is sustainable. It's continuous. It's a two-way. But how do we actually sustain that rapport? Media sensibility is on our side. We as activists and advocates, do we understand? Do we have media sense to understand?
Mildred, please conclude.
Yes, thank you very much. And so do we have media sense? You know, lastly, I'd like to emphasize that for us to amplify our feminist advocacy, we have to really look at connecting the dots of effective media communications through knowing your media, through strengthening our messaging, through being consistent and being intentional. That for me is extremely important. For us, it is important to be consistent, but especially being intentional. Why do we do the work that we do? And that takes us back to the soul of our feminist advocacy. Understanding the soul of our feminist advocacy will help us to really get into effective feminist advocacy and therefore impact and transformation. Thank you very much.
Mildred, thank you very much. Excellent points regarding to decolonization, our communication. It's excellent focus on women and girls. It's about transformative advocacy approaches. It's very, very important. And our Women's Major Group platform is really platform for sharing experience and empowering women and girls, empowering all of us on these issues. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Rashita Gupta, who is Information and Communication Officer at Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development. Rashita is queer feminist, activist, and a communication specialist with more than 8 years of experience in developing and executing a communication advocacy strategy for social justice movements, intersecting gender, climate, land, labor, migrant, health, education, and digital rights. Currently, she is leading their work on feminist digital rights and justice. Dear Rashita, as Information and Communication Officer at Asia Pacific Forum of Women, Law and Development, can you tell us about the long-term strategy for media advocacy around SDG in your organization? What exactly advocacy strategy has been developed and have been implementing? How did you sustain the momentum? What were the tools and tips from the process? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Valentina, and thank you, WMG, for organizing this session. So far, it's going so amazing. And I just want to thank Natasha and Mildred for their presentations. They were really powerful. And I feel like what I want to share is kind of in continuation with what Mildred was talking about, which is owning our stories. And, you know, when we talk about media advocacy from Global South and amplifying the voices from Global South, to really focus on whether the amplification is actually happening in the region before we try and target something that is more global north. So I want to present what some of the strategies that we have been following at APWLD. So as you know, like APWLD is also a member-based organization with around 250 plus grassroots members. So but some of the challenges we have had is, like Mildred said, like these are the stories of women and girls that we are working with, but are they really being put out there? Is it their voice that is being put out there? And when we work in APWLD, I think that is the central objective that we have, that is to make sure that our members and the communities that we work with, it's their voices that are being amplified rather than us being the medium through which it is happening, because it is their it is their struggles, their issues that they're working on the ground, and it's them who have to deal with all the structural barriers that we are all collectively fighting, not just in our countries but also globally. So at APWLD, one of the very long-term strategies that we started was something called a media fellowship. So we started a dedicated media fellowship where focus on bringing in women journalists from the region to work with us over a period of 10 months in a year. And then help them basically first build, work with them to build their capacity on the issues that we're working with. So we do talk about, like what Mildred was saying, like the media sensibility, so we all know that there is a mainstream dominant narrative that doesn't really allow the voices of women or gender diverse individuals to come out. So then how do we address that gap? So one of the obvious gaps for us that we identified was the certain lack of understanding around women's issues and feminist voices in the media that we look at, or in the media that we call mainstream media. So through this media fellowship, one of our objectives was to bring these women journalists together and help like build that capacity on talking about what is feminist development justice, what do we mean when we say feminists want system change, and then basically help them connect with these grassroots members that we have, and allow or facilitate the process where they can go and visit and meet up with our members directly in the field or in the regions that they are working in, like to see the work on the ground. Now, like I know, like one of the biggest challenges that we have when it comes to media advocacy around HLPF or SDG is the fact that it is so technical. Like media always says, it is so technical, like what Mildred said, so what, like media asked that question. And our one of the other objectives for us was to really break down what does it mean when governments say that they are achieving sustainable development goals? What does it mean when they say they have VNR reporting, and when they present all of these reports at in international spaces? So when they worked with these members, they could really understand that, what the government or the state actors are presenting in their mainstream media or in their national media, is that actually happening on the ground? Like that is something that they could directly see. And we also felt that a lot of times, a lot of these mainstream journalists just did not have the capacity to be able to experience that, experience those realities of the ground, or have the opportunities to go and meet these communities that are actually working on, achieving these sustainable development goals. So in 2018, we launched our second media fellowship, which focused exclusively on reporting on sustainable development goals. And if you don't mind, I want to just share my screen to show some of the examples. So we had, I think, around 5 or 6 journalists. Please let me know if you can see it. I hope you can see it. Yeah, so we had around 5 or 6 journalists from Asia Pacific join us. So we had journalists from Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Papua New Guinea, Mongolia, Pakistan, who joined us for this media fellowship. And then we did a dedicated training or workshop with them, where we really broke down the the technicalities around SDG, around HLPF, around VNR reporting, around development justice, and systemic change, structural barriers. And then we help them connect with our members on the ground. So these journalists were from the countries where our members actually work. And I just want to share some of the results of that media fellowship, and how it helped us. So, for example, we had this journalist from Sri Lanka who works with one of the biggest newspapers in Sri Lanka, and following the media fellowship, as part of a media fellowship, she did this like really in-depth piece on women's political participation in Sri Lanka, which directly reported on SDG goal 5, specifically when it comes to gender and gender representation, and really help break down the language from very technical language to what does it mean when women talk about sustainable development goals and their and their role in helping achieve Agenda 2030. So this is just one of the examples, and then one of the benefits are also like the sustainability, Valentina, like you asked us, was that because of this 1 year that the journalists spent with us and our members, we were able to foster like a really long relationship with them. So following which, like the next year, we were again able to reach out to the journalists, or throughout the time we kept reaching out to them, to give them updates on how, what are the different issues that we are working on. And it's not just us. It also allowed our members to build that really strong relationship with the journalists, so that they could also reach out to them directly or invite them, or share their updates with them, and help build that trust that Mildred was talking about. Like it really helped build that trust with them. Similarly, we had this journalist from Mongolia, who one of the first stories that she did, and which was very powerful, was to do a comparative piece on VNR report that the government presents versus the shadow VNR report that the CSOs present. And so this is also something that we have seen as a gap, that the CSOs or the organizations work on these shadow reports, which actually present the ground reality, and how journalists are not picking this up, as frequently as we would like. So this really helped bring forth that challenge, and also help fill that gap that we had been looking at for a long time. And this third journalist from Papua New Guinea reported on climate change in Papua New Guinea, and we actually saw quite a significant impact where following her report. So this was a radio report and a documentary in 1 year. And then we saw that her report led to the government, local government, responding to climate adaptation, like lack of climate adaptation funding, and really filled that gap, that the journalists had helped highlight. So I understand that this is a very like long-term strategy, and maybe not every organization has the budget or the capacity to do something for so long-term. And I know I have like barely a minute left, so I just quickly cover like another thing that we helped some of our members do was, this strategy where we encourage them to invite members for a training themselves. So it doesn't have to be like long term, but before HLPF. So for example, just at the beginning of the year, and especially if they are from a country that has a VNR report that year, they could just bring in the journalists and share, like the work that they have been doing, and like give them a heads up more or less on what they can expect from HLPF. Yeah, Valentin, I see your signs, so just 30 seconds more, just to like see just to give them a heads up on what they can expect from HLPF this year. And like to take an example of Sri Lanka, where a member did this training with the journalists, to tell them that, oh, like a Sri Lankan government will be presenting this VNR, this is a shadow report, and like you will see these differences. So it at least allows for a more balanced reporting on behalf of mainstream journalists, and make sure like it is not just a government dominant narrative. So I just want to share some of these examples, and then just one last tip before we go is that a lot of times we have seen that WMG members, when it comes to talking about SDG, focus a lot on HLPF. And one of the things I think we think can help is if we look at our media advocacy as an year-long strategy rather than one event focused strategy. So, like looking at the goal at the beginning of the year and working on it rather than like in, May or June. Yeah, so that's the major part of my presentation, and I'm happy to take on any questions or look forward to the detailed discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashida, for valuable points. It's very important, your presentation of regional context, exploring the experience of many countries, valuable. It's also I would like to add only one point. Women's Major Group have a very good experience to help to support our NGO on preparation of shadow VNR's reports to place on Women's Major Group website too. And I think in the future we can use this opportunity. Thank you very much, Rashida. And now I would like to invite as speaker our Suzanne Dalival. She's a climate justice creative campaigner, researcher, lecturer on environmental justice, and trainer on creative strategy of decolonization. Suzanne has led campaign and artistic intervention to challenge fossil fuel investment in the Arctic and Nigeria that violate the rights of indigenous people and of those seeking justice in the wake of the BP Gulf of Mexico disaster. Her corporate and financial campaigning spans over a decade. She has lectured on white supremacy and environmentalism at Oxford University and numerous universities globally. It's excellent experience and has offered creative strategy workshops to decolonize activists and to find creative strategy to recenter indigenous, Black, POC, and frontline voices in climate media and communications. Susan, you bring important experience and expertise from the climate communications. From your experience, what are the most important points to be provided when we try to ensure intersectional stories and connection, gender and climate, that can be featured in media outlets? What support does your organization provide to partnering organizations on these issues? Thank you. You have the floor.
Great. I just wondering, is it possible to share my screen?
Now it will be.
Okay, great. And I'll just share screen. Apologies. Okay, can you see that? Yeah, great. Okay, so thank you everyone for having me here today, and just sort of hearing from everyone. It's just been such a rich conversation, and some of the things that I wanted to touch on are both from the history of communications work that I've done, primarily lifting up frontline Indigenous communities resisting extraction. And I think that's something really important when we think about decolonizing climate justice and decolonizing media around both achieving sustainability and also understanding how we got to the situation that we're in now. We have to really take into account the front line, and that means connecting these struggles to the site of extraction, making sure that we're bringing land struggles into this, as well as thinking about future scenarios and reducing our impact. As we know, 80% of the biodiversity that needs to be protected across the planet is under the legal jurisdiction in different various forms of Indigenous communities. So my work has actually been this image, is this megaphone, and holding it to the ear, that so much of the work of advocacy and communicating also involves listening. And that's something that sometimes in advocacy or campaigning can be lost, that we really have to have a clear ear to the ground. And I think this really came through on what Mildred was saying about decolonizing the work and really listening to what the communities are saying on the ground, both in terms of their analysis of the climate crisis, how we got there, and also the solutions that they're advocating for. So a lot of my work has been in the Canadian tar sands, which is one of the second fastest rates of deforestation. And since 2009, we've been working to lift up women, Indigenous women who are on the front lines of that struggle. So many of those women are fighting for their treaty rights, for there to be a full investigation of the health impacts of the crisis and to look at the cumulative impacts assessment. However, many people don't know there's a long history of genocide and racism within Canada. So the issue was that there wasn't the ability to get those checks and balances, there's actually been no cumulative impact assessment of the tar sands, and it's one of the most carbon intensive projects on the planet. So, this is what it looks like before, and this is what it looks like after. So again, in terms of the narrative for the communities there, this is about talking about that relationship to the land, what has been lost, the traditional land rights, the traditional land uses. So getting those stories can sometimes be difficult because they're longer stories, what's being talked about, this long range view. So we've really worked hard to get these longer range stories about what is the history of colonialism in Canada, how does that connect to extractivism, and also changing the language. Canada wanted to call this tar sands, and we had to shift it to oil sands, and sorry, from oil sands to tar sands. So sometimes even the language changes, you're fighting for that shift in narrative over a decade. And so a lot of the work that we did was making sure that the media that we lifted up, this was some of the advocacy work that happened in the UK to lift this up. And what was really important was the communities directed this whole campaign. So they directed the logo, how it looked, the messaging, and we had to do consultation on each press release that went out. And I think that's really important when you're doing frontline work with communities who are on the front line of extraction, in terms of what I said, the narrative, the goals, but also the security concerns. It's often communities who will be at the front lines of those impacts. So when we did media in London and we were targeting BP and Shell, often those communities would end up with a helicopter from the oil companies in their garden the next day, and they would be dealing with the security implications. So building a security plan into your media plan, especially when you're working with frontline Indigenous communities. And this is another thing as well, is that when we're talking about frontline communities, often what looks like activism or campaigning can be embedded in the culture of the community. So here's a healing walk that the community did that was very important. We also wanted to highlight issues of missing, murdered Indigenous women. There's an epidemic of violence against women that comes with extractivism. And so sometimes it's also about telling those wider narratives about, as well as the impacts on the land. And so we had a campaign that, was about mirroring how violence against the bodies is violence against the land, and how that's a long-term situation that we're working with. And so some of those campaigns have been traditional media, they've been reports, but also storytelling from the front lines. And I think it's really important to know that sometimes with traditional media, sometimes social media can also generate the stories. There's a synergy there, especially if you have influencers and good storytelling. Another part of this has been exposing the financial and corporate connections between extractivism and frontline communities. And again, this is a really long-term story that we've been telling for a decade. And so it's pointing out both to highlight those corporations, and there's many reasons why we do that. One is to put accountability on those companies for their climate impacts, but also the fact that many of these companies are invested, or banks are invested in projects that do not have consent. And that's another messaging that we've been working with. How does consent for these projects mirror the cause that we're asking for, consent for our bodies, for our autonomy, reproductive justice? So a lot of the actions that we've done at these AGMs, there's often a stunt to get the attention of the media. How do you get them out to the annual general meeting? There's an inside-outside strategy, working with a coalition of NGOs, asking questions, putting the pressure on, and thinking about multiple audiences here. There's the media press, but there's also the shareholders, that you want to put pressure internally on the company for accountability. And what's been crucial for us is that, often within even the campaigning space, people can say, well, we just want to focus on the numbers, but it's really crucial to know that the human rights implications, the gender violence is a crucial issue, because it impacts the social license of the company and the bank to operate, and it also affects the brand image of that community, and also the violations of Indigenous rights, human rights, also have implications for the shareholders as well. So I think there's a real multiplicity of how we've engaged with some of the strategies on there. one of the other things has been, to keep an issue like tar sands, like, oh, it goes so fast. So I'm just going to quickly conclude. This is just, some of the other frontline struggles that we've worked with. We've worked with sculptures and interventions, and working with different artists is a way to reach new audiences, to bring new synergies, to come up with creative ways to have photo galleries, different ways to get attention, and also decolonizing it, that we're thinking not just of the audience that we want to move, but also how do we report things like the COP to Indigenous communities who are back home. And also the last thing I would say just really quickly is that with GSCC, one of the things that we offer is support for campaigns, to do media tracking, strategic development, and also the new thing is to how do we bring new audiences in as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne, for excellent presentation. Incredible art tools, how to combine gender justice, art, culture. It's incredible, and I think it's an excellent experience for all of us to implement more on gendering and climate justice focused tools. Thank you very much. And now I would like to present the floor to our friend, to Lois Herman, special speaker, as all of you. Lois is a researcher and gender specialist and has an extensive professional history in corporate management, including international. Lois is founder and managing director the Women's UN Report Network. The Women's UN Report Network, LISERT, considered one of the most expensive and active gender LISERT in the world, goes through the UN system and to governments, embassy, mission, academia, NGO, religious association, foundation, media, private sector, civil society, and more. In 2015, Lois received the Spirit of the United Nations Award for upholding the founding spirit of the UN. She is also a well-known poet who can capture in verse the heart and soul of woman. Lois, can you tell us about your organization, about your experience? How did you start and involved in these issues? How did you aid bringing feminist voice to the traditional media? You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, I see many familiar faces, not only on the screen, but also in the participants list. And I think that the issue of relationships is so vital. In media, as some of my colleagues have said, it's who you know and how you build that relationship and make it sustainable. And that could be local, it could be regional, or it could be international. And one run, our very beginning was at the United Nations. And Mary Robinson, who was then the High Commissioner for Human Rights, had commissioned for the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief to write a study. And he did. And that study was the status of women, freedom of religion or belief, and traditions. And so when he presented that in Geneva, a group of us were called together and they said, we must give this report life. It cannot go only on the shelf. And it has so much diversification in the theme about women, religion, and traditions. And so after the Human Rights Council created a network of 15 women all over the world who were committed and focused on women's rights. And those of you here today could have easily been on that group because we needed your ideas. And two things came out very significant. One, was that we needed a listserv. We needed to reach out to people. We needed to hear what they were doing and what they could do with us in order to create a combined advocacy that would have some policy impact and that would create entry points to meeting with diplomats and government people and academia. Remember the silos, my friends. When we see material that's published, often it's in a silo effect. It's corporate, or it's academic, or it's political. But what I want to see is public will and political will come together. And by talking with these wonderful relationships, and those could come online, those could come in many different ways. But keeping them going, stroking them, as you might say, and showing you that you care and will do what you can to work with them to create the cause and get somewhere. Well, I think that there have been many changes in media since we started 19 years ago. And I never will forget, I see Howery on our participant list, I'll never forget the day when I got the email from New York, from the NGO CSW, that CSW was going to be closed. And it was a shock because many of us wanted to go together and even in the back hallways, talk about how we were going to move forward and what made a difference. And from that point on, it was COVID, it was lockdowns, it was real changes to go from an in-person format to one that is virtual. And some of us still struggle with that. Not all women around the world have the access to the screens and to the technology that we have here in this webinar. Okay. I'd like to mention a couple other changes. One is that the age of our advocacy audience has changed. We have a gentrifying population in this world. And they may not be used to high-tech news, material, information. It may intimidate them. So we have to reach out to include our own. Yes, girls. Yes, young women. But also those who are aging and still want to know what's going on in this world. I particularly happen to have followed Ukraine for several years. We did a panel together in New York twice. But my 4 children are half Ukrainian. And so I have a vested interest in networking with the WFUFO and also following the news. But I have to look deep. I can't just look on the surface. When you get 200 emails a day, you wonder what really is meaningful, what is diverse in geographical location, what is diverse in age, in situation. I mean, all of these things create a reason to communicate in today's times. And now I have 2 more things. One is that One Run has been paying special attention to online violence against women. We had an event in Geneva and one in Brussels, and we are continuing to do that, including with the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. But this is a serious, a tragic situation that causes girls to self-harm, sometimes to actually commit suicide. But most of all, there's a lot of trafficking going on, including with refugees and migrants. So these are part of the new media. We have to keep our eyes on that change that threatens our own gender. So it's not easy to challenge with advocacy private media. There's advertising, there's marketing. How much do we see about the drugs we should take, or how we should have surgeries or take certain pills to feel good, or the fashions? This could intimidate some women, but most of all, it can be dangerous again with trafficking. Young girls being met online by men, people of any age, and they're vulnerable. They may be lonely. But now with the iPhone in their hand, they can do what they want. So those are some of the points that One Run has addressed. We are committed to addressing the human rights, oppression, and empowerment of women and girls all over the world, and every single day. Thank you. I'm glad to answer some questions.
Thank you very much, Lois, for powerful presentation and inspiring to all of us. And now I would like to express my gratitude and many thanks to all speakers for powerful presentation, and to open the session for question and answers. And now at the beginning, we have 2 questions, and maybe our speakers, but all speakers will have 1, maximum 2 minutes to offer their opinion. Our first question: how to bring mainstream media to speak feminist language? Excellent question. And second question: how do we decolonize language? Will we need to speak, write, read using the language of colonizers of the world? Excellent questions. Who would like to start? We